Feral by Night is a storytelling series of eerie tales and all the things that go bump in the night. I'm Papa G, and this is Feral by Night. Free episodes release every week, but premium members on Patreon or Buzzsprout can double their weekly stories with extra subscriber-only episodes. So turn the lights down and settle in. Some stories are better heard after dark. Gina knew she had done something wrong the moment the broom cut through the white line, and the house went quiet. It wasn't the regular kind of quiet that came after the television was turned off, or after traffic thinned out on the road outside. It was the kind of quiet that made the whole house feel like it had stopped breathing. Her Aunt Bev's house was never completely still. The refrigerator clicked in the kitchen. The heat ticked through the old floor vents, and the pipes knocked softly inside the walls when the water heater came on. Even at night, there was always some small sound reminding Gina that the house was old, lived in, and full of little movements. But when the salt scattered across the hallway floor, every sound stopped at once. Gina stood there with the broom in both hands, staring down at the mess she'd made. And for the first time that evening, she remembered exactly what Aunt Bev had told her. She had been told not to touch the salt line. It stretched from one baseboard to the other across the entrance to the hallway, right where the living room ended and the bedrooms began. Aunt Bev had laid it there in a careful white stripe, straight enough that it looked measured. Gina had noticed it as soon as she came over after school, but her aunt had said it so casually that Gina put it in the same category as all the other house rules. Don't leave wet towels on the bathroom floor. Don't eat crackers in bed. Don't forget to lock the back door. Don't touch the salt line in the hallway. At 16, Gina had heard enough strange instructions from adults to stop asking questions. Aunt Bev was kind, but she had her ways. She kept a jar of rusty nails on the back porch, tied red thread around the broom handle, and once told Gina never to sweep after dark unless she wanted to sweep the luck out with the dirt. So the salt line hadn't seemed serious until the ants came. Gina had spilled sugar earlier while making tea, and by evening a thin black trail of ants had found it near the kitchen cabinet. She swept the kitchen, followed the ants into the living room, and saw white grains scattered near the hallway. She thought some of the salt had already been dragged across the floor by accident. She was annoyed, tired, and a little embarrassed that her aunt's house had ants in it while Gina was supposed to be watching the place. So she swept it. The broom made a dry scratching sound as it cut through the salt. The clean white stripe broke apart at once, scattering into thin little trails across the old wood. Gina pushed the broom forward one more time before her brain caught up with what her hands had already done. That was when the silence came. She stood still, waiting for the refrigerator to click back on. It didn't. She waited for the pipes to knock or for a car to pass outside. Nothing came. The whole house had gone quiet around her, as if it were listening to see what would happen next. Then the mirror at the end of the hallway darkened. It was an old mirror in a heavy wooden frame, hung between the two bedroom doors. Gina had never liked it because it reflected too much of the house. If she crossed the living room, she could see herself moving far away at the end of the hall, small and pale in the glass. Aunt Bev said the mirror had come with the place and was too heavy to take down alone. Now Gina could see the hallway in it, but the reflection was wrong. In the real hallway, there was nothing but polished floor, closed doors, and the salt she had just scattered. In the mirror, someone was standing near the bathroom door, turned slightly toward the wall. The figure looked like a woman in a faded house dress, but the reflection was dim enough that Gina couldn't make out her face. Gina spun around so fast the broom handle knocked against the wall. The hallway behind her was empty. The bathroom door was closed. The bedroom doors were closed. There was no woman standing anywhere. She looked back at the mirror. The woman in the reflection was facing her now. Gina backed into the living room and almost tripped over the dustpan. For a few seconds, she told herself it had to be some kind of reflection from outside. Headlights, maybe. A person passing the front window. Something ordinary that only looked wrong because the house was old and the light in the hallway was bad. Then the woman in the mirror lifted one hand and placed it against the inside of the glass. Gina dropped the broom. She grabbed her phone from the couch and called Aunt Bev, but the call rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Her aunt worked the evening shift at a nursing home, and Gina knew she didn't always answer right away. But this time, that small, normal reason didn't comfort her. She called again. The second call went straight to voicemail. Gina texted that she had accidentally swept the salt in the hallway and that there was something wrong with the mirror, but the message stayed frozen halfway through sending. A sound came from the hallway. It was soft, but it was real. Bare feet stepped once on the wood, then stopped. Gina didn't look at the mirror this time. She stared into the actual hallway, the hallway she could see with her own eyes. It was empty, but the sound came again, slow and close, stopping just past the place where the salt line had been. She moved toward the kitchen because it was the only room with another door to the outside. She kept her eyes low so she wouldn't see the hallway mirror, but that didn't help. The kitchen window over the sink had turned black with night, and in that black glass she saw the hallway reflected behind her. It was full of people. Gina froze with one hand on the counter. The kitchen window didn't show the backyard anymore. It showed the hallway from the wrong angle, as if the glass had become another mirror. Figures stood shoulder to shoulder between the bedroom doors. Some looked like adults, some were smaller. Most of them were turned toward the empty place where the salt line used to be. They weren't rushing or clawing or pressing their faces to the glass. That would have been easier to understand. They were standing very still, packed together in the reflection, like they had been waiting a long time and had only just noticed the door was open. Gina forced herself to look over her shoulder. The real hallway was still empty. In the dark kitchen window, the crowd shifted. One of the smaller figures stepped forward, and Gina turned on every kitchen light so fast that her fingers slapped the switches. The window brightened, but the shapes didn't disappear completely. They were still there behind her reflection, faint and gray, watching from a hallway that wasn't there. She went to the pantry because salt was the only thing that made sense. Aunt Bev kept several containers on the bottom shelf, cheap round ones with metal spouts. Gina grabbed one, tore it open with shaking fingers, and hurried back toward the living room. The floor felt colder the closer she got to the hallway. She poured salt where the line had been, but it came out too fast and fell in clumps instead of one clean stripe. She tried to drag it straight with the edge of her hand, but the grains stuck to her fingers and scattered into the cracks between the boards. She poured more. The container shook so badly that salt bounced across the floor and rolled under the baseboards. In the hallway mirror, the crowd leaned forward. Gina could see them even without looking directly at the glass. She saw pale feet near the bottom of the reflection, old hems hanging still, and a child's hand dangling beside someone's skirt. There were more people than could have fit in that narrow hallway, and somehow they all had room to move closer. Then Gina noticed something worse. The new salt line wasn't stopping them. In the mirror, their bare feet were standing in it. Gina stumbled backward into the living room and hit the arm of the couch. The salt container slipped out of her hand and rolled under the coffee table, leaving a broken white trail behind it. Her phone buzzed a second later, so suddenly that she nearly screamed. Aunt Bev's name was on the screen. Gina answered and pressed the phone hard against her ear, but the call was breaking apart. Aunt Bev's voice came through in pieces, frightened but not surprised, and Gina caught only enough to make things worse. Her aunt told her not to look into any mirror and not to cross the salt line, even if the hall looked empty. Then the call cut out. Gina stood there with the phone still pressed to her ear. She had already crossed the line twice. The bathroom door opened at the end of the hall. It happened in the real hallway this time. The door moved only a few inches, slow enough that Gina heard the hinge scrape. The dark room beyond it smelled damp and stale, like old towels shut up in a cabinet. Gina backed toward the front door, unlocked it, turned the knob, and pulled. The door opened, but the porch wasn't there. The streetlight wasn't there. The steps weren't there. The hallway was there. It stretched beyond the front door exactly as it did behind her, with the same bathroom door open at the far end and the same old mirror hanging between the bedrooms. Gina slammed the front door shut and backed away from it, breathing so hard that her chest hurt. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Aunt Bev. The message came through in pieces. The first part told her to use the gray jar in the linen closet. The second part said kitchen salt wouldn't hold them. The third part said not to let them see her face in the mirror. Gina read the messages twice before she understood the worst part. The linen closet was in the hallway. It was on the left, just past the broken salt line. Not far, maybe 6 steps. In the real hallway, nothing stood between Gina and the closet door. In every reflective surface in the living room, the hallway was packed so full of bodies that it looked like a crowded room. The television screen showed them. The glass over Aunt Bev's framed pictures showed them too. Even the small brass clock on the wall caught enough reflection to show pale faces turned toward Gina, waiting for her to look up. She pulled her hoodie around her face and turned off the hallway light, thinking darkness might help. It didn't. The mirror stayed clear in the dim room, and the figures inside it looked brighter than before. Gina moved toward the hallway with one hand against the wall. Her sock touched the scattered salt, and the floor went ice cold beneath her. The bedroom doors opened a little as she passed, not wide, just enough to show dark lines where the rooms began. She kept her head down and counted steps. 1, 2, 3. The linen closet was close enough that she could smell cedar chips and laundry soap inside it. Her fingers found the knob, turned it, and pulled the door open. Something breathed beside her ear. Gina squeezed her eyes shut and reached into the closet without looking. Her hand knocked towels off the shelf, brushed a stack of washcloths, and finally struck glass. She grabbed the jar with both hands and pulled it tight against her chest. The jar was heavier than it should have been. The salt inside was gray, coarse, and mixed with little black flecks. A strip of masking tape on the lid had Aunt Bev's handwriting on it, but Gina didn't stop to read it. She ran back to the living room. Behind her, the hallway filled with footsteps. They were not loud footsteps. Loud would have been easier. These were soft and bare, close together, like a crowd moving carefully so it wouldn't be heard. Gina dropped to her knees at the edge of the hallway and unscrewed the jar. A sharp mineral smell rose from it, like storm water and iron. She poured the gray salt slowly this time, keeping her head down and her hoodie pulled forward so the mirror couldn't catch her face. She made one thick line from baseboard to baseboard. Then she poured another line over it, then a third. The gray salt covered the scattered kitchen salt, filled the cracks between the boards, and made a rough, heavy border across the hallway. The footsteps stopped. Gina stayed on the floor, waiting for something to touch her. Nothing did. After a few seconds, the refrigerator clicked in the kitchen, and one of the pipes knocked inside the wall. The house was making sounds again, but she didn't move from the floor until headlights crossed the front windows hours later. Aunt Bev came in just before morning. She stepped through the front door, saw Gina sitting against the couch with the empty gray jar in her lap, and stopped before crossing the room. Her face changed when she saw the broken kitchen salt under the gray line. Gina tried to explain, but Aunt Bev raised one hand to stop her. She didn't look angry. That would have been easier for Gina to handle. She looked sick, like she had always known this could happen and had been hoping it never would. Aunt Bev walked to the hallway mirror and turned it around so the glass faced the wallpaper. Then she went from room to room, covering every reflective surface she could find. She covered the television with a towel, taped newspaper over the kitchen window, and laid pillowcases over the framed pictures in the living room. Gina followed her without asking questions. By then, she didn't want answers as much as she wanted the house to stay quiet. She wanted the hallway to remain empty. She wanted the salt to keep doing whatever it had done before she was stupid enough to sweep it away. When they were finished, Aunt Bev stood behind the gray line and looked down the hall. The bathroom door was closed again. The bedroom doors were closed. The floor beyond the salt looked bare and ordinary in the weak morning light. For a few seconds, Gina almost believed it was over. Then Aunt Bev turned toward the hallway mirror. It had shifted back around on its own. The glass no longer showed the woman in the faded dress. It no longer showed the child who had stepped forward, or the crowd packed tight between the bedroom doors. The real hallway behind them was empty, still and quiet in the morning light. But in the mirror, dozens of bare feet stood together in the salt. Feral by Night is the sister podcast to The Feral Folklorist. You can find information for both podcasts at feralfolklorist.com. If you'd like more Feral by Night each week, premium members on Patreon or Buzzsprout get extra subscriber-only episodes that don't appear on the public feed. You can become a patron at patreon.com/PapaG or subscribe through the Buzzsprout premium membership options. And if you're ever in the market for metaphysical supplies, our store, Aroma G's Botanica, has been weaving magic for over 25 years. That's over at aromags.com.